September 1929. A clerk in Lower Manhattan felt the air change the way you feel thunder before lightning. He walked into his bank on a workday morning, opened his passbook, and withdrew every dollar he could reach. The paper was heavy in his hands, the smell of ink and stamp on the teller slip sharp under the gaslight. 2 days later, the market collapsed, and those who had kept their cash in hand could wait the storm out while others faced locked doors and empty vaults. Now imagine trying to do the same in 2026. You log into your retirement portal, scroll to your 401k, and see $180,000 saved over 2 decades. You click withdraw, and the screen does not hand you bills. It calculates penalties, taxes, and early withdrawal fees. It warns about processing windows and online identity verification. Your $180,000 becomes a number reduced by tax, by a 10% penalty, by a processing hold, and maybe by an internal review labeled suspicious activity. You hit submit and the system queues your request with thousands of others. You do not get a teller handing you paper. You get a message that reads temporarily unavailable. This is not coincidence. This is design. The financial architecture today is built to prevent the very escape the man from 1929 executed. I will show you how we arrived here, why the trap is more dangerous now, and what concrete steps you can take to protect money that may feel yours but can be trapped by rules, code, and protocols. Hear the soft tap of keys and the low hum of servers as you try to pull your life savings free. If you hold a retirement account or run a small business, this is for you. What will change between 1929 and 2026, and can any of it save you? You sit at your kitchen table. The laptop is warm, your coffee is cold and bitter. On screen, your 401k shows $180,000. You press withdraw and immediately see line items that make your stomach drop. Federal tax withholding, 20%. State tax, 4%. Early withdrawal penalty, 10%. Account maintenance fees, 2%, and a processing delay of 7 to 10 business days. You call your brokerage and listen to hold music with a low electronic thud that sounds like a heartbeat. A voice answers, "We see a large withdrawal request flagged for manual review." You say, "I need the cash now." The representative says, "We are initiating a compliance review per our policy on redemptions above the usual pattern." You tell them you are in an emergency. They say, "We can offer a hardship distribution, but it requires documentation and may still be subject to tax and penalties." You ask if you can get a wire out. They respond, "Wires are processed in batch windows and outbound limits apply after secondary approvals." You feel your palms sweat, the plastic of your chair rough under your fingers. Behind the calm phrases, there is a logic you did not expect. Systems built to stabilize markets will prioritize systemic survival over individual access. A numerical example will make it concrete. $180,000 with a 10% penalty becomes $162,000 after taxes are withheld and fees paid. Expect 5 to 10 days before funds move, and longer if liquidity in the underlying funds is stressed. If millions of accounts try the same, systems apply suspensions labeled suspension of redemptions. The word redemption moves from abstract to fate. This scene is not fiction. Fidelity paused certain transactions in 2008 under extreme stress. Woodford Equity Income in the UK suspended redemptions in 2019. In March 2020, ETFs traded at deep discounts to net asset value, demonstrating how apparent liquidity can vanish in sudden conditions. Imagine that friction multiplied across pension funds, money market funds, mutual funds, and digital custodial platforms all at once. You are not holding paper bills like the man in 1929. You are holding entitlements registered in code and contracts that can be gated. Before 1929, the financial plumbing was simpler in several respects. Bank accounts were paper-based or passbook-based, certificates stamped and dated. Liquidity meant coins and notes in a vault or under a mattress. If you were willing to withdraw in cash, you immediately had options. Trading settlement cycles were slower but more human. Brokerages settled trades with physical certificates and human couriers. The lack of instantaneous leverage and complex derivatives meant runs took longer to propagate. Fear was transmitted by line of sight, by newspapers, by physical crowds. The sense of touch mattered. A deposit slip had an inked stamp, and a bank teller nodded as paper changed hands. That tactile certainty insulated some depositors who acted early. But those methods were also fragile to bank failures and a deficient safety net. After 1929, reforms created deposit insurance and far-reaching regulation precisely to prevent runs. Those reforms reduced the need to run but introduced a different dependency, a dependency on institutions that manage access centrally. When the safety net works, it keeps the doors open for most, but it also assumes institutions can control when doors open and what form the currency takes. The inventory of modern traps is long and deliberate. First, there are penalties and taxation rules that make immediate withdrawal costly. A 10% early withdrawal penalty plus immediate tax withholding can slice away a large share of value before you touch a cent. Second, there are administrative time locks, processing windows, batch settlements, and manual compliance reviews that insert days and even weeks between your decision and your access. Third, there are formal suspensions of redemptions used by mutual funds and ETFs in extreme stress when market makers cannot support normal liquidity. Fourth, there are internal fraud and suspicious activity reports that trigger holds while institutions file suspicious activity reports, SARs, with regulators. Fifth, there are gatekeeping mechanisms, algorithms and risk models that prioritize preserving system stability over individual liquidity needs. Real cases illustrate these mechanisms. In March 2020, market makers widened spreads and some ETFs traded at 20% discounts to their net asset values as market makers withdrew liquidity. Fidelity and Vanguard adjusted settlement processes in 2008 and again in 2020 under pressure. The Woodford scandal in 2019 showed how open-ended funds can be frozen when assets become illiquid because managers cannot value underlying holdings quickly or sell them without collapsing prices. Silicon Valley Bank in 2023 revealed that a funding mismatch and a rush of withdrawals can be fatal even to sophisticated banks, and regulators will choose orderly resolution over immediate depositor access beyond FDIC limits. These are not abstract regulations. They are clauses in contracts you signed the day you enrolled in your retirement plan. The architecture includes 401k penalty rules governed by the IRS, mutual fund prospectus clauses about suspension of redemptions, and brokerage terms that permit hold for compliance reviews. The instruments magnify the problem. ETFs and mutual funds promise daily liquidity but rely on market makers, underlying liquidity in treasuries and corporate bonds, and repo markets to function. When repo rates spike and bid-ask spreads widen, market makers step back. When repo dries up in one day, as it did in October 2019, borrowing costs skyrocketed and institutional flows became constrained. The system substitutes legal and operational gates for the physical run of 1929. Why was this design chosen? Regulators and policymakers made trade-offs with clear intent after 1929 and again after 2008. Post-1929 reforms aimed to stop runs by making depositors safer and by empowering central banks to act as lenders of last resort. After 2008, the emphasis shifted to preventing fire sales and containing counterparty risk through capital rules and resolution regimes. The logic was stability over immediate individual prerogative. The Federal Reserve and FDIC, together with securities regulators, prioritized rules that reduce contagion. That included measures that increase friction on withdrawals when systemic stress is present so that one large outflow does not cascade into a full collapse. The trade-off is deliberate. A system that lets everyone withdraw instantly during panic risks everyone losing everything. A system that inserts friction risks trapping individuals who need access. Policymakers accepted a level of individual loss in exchange for the prevention of broader collapses. The line between prudent and punitive is thin. These choices are political and technical, and they have real human consequences when applied with automated speed. Alavancaje hidden in the plumbing accelerates everything. Derivatives concentration, collateralized loan obligations, CLOs, and leverage ratios of 20 to 50 to 1 in some structured trades mean that losses can amplify in hours, not weeks. High-frequency algorithms react to price moves and withdraw liquidity in milliseconds. Circuit breakers are meant to slow extreme moves, but they can also delay price discovery and create gaps in availability. In March 2020, volatility spiked and leveraged funds hit margin.
Calls that forced asset sales into thin markets, widening spreads and locking mutual funds out of normal operations. The repo market can go from calm to stressed in a single day, as it did in September 2019 when term repo rates soared and the Fed had to step in. These mechanisms are technical, but the result is simple. Your ability to convert holdings into spendable cash can evaporate faster than any bank queue in 1929. To put this in process terms, a typical redemption flow now looks like this. An investor submits a redemption request. The fund platform routes it through an automation layer that checks KYC and AML. The request is compared to historical patterns and risk thresholds. If it exceeds thresholds, a manual compliance review is triggered. The compliance team may request documentation. The fund may attempt to meet the redemption from available cash. If not possible, it may sell liquid positions or use market makers. If market makers withdraw, the fund may suspend redemptions and notify regulators. That process can stretch days into weeks under stress, and each step is defined in legal documents you accepted. You need evidence, not just theory. Look at insiders and sovereign actors repositioning. In the last 2 years, insider selling in certain sectors rose ahead of price drops, and filings show executives trimming exposure. Sovereign wealth funds adjusted allocations from public credit into longer-dated treasuries and gold equivalents, a defensive move that reduces their participation in day-to-day market making. Treasuries themselves displayed signs of stress when yields spiked and liquidity evaporated during episodes of large issuance and sudden demand shifts. Market makers told regulators they were pulling back in times of volatility, widening spreads, and making the promise of daily liquidity mathematically fragile. These are signals of the start of serious dislocations. When major players quietly move to protect capital, the rest of the market feels the pull. You can observe numerical clues. Insider selling percentages in SEC filings increased by double digits in lead-up to specific sell-offs. Sovereign fund redeployments shifted allocation by 5 to 10% in certain quarters, and bid-ask spreads in certain corporate bonds widened from fractions of a percent to several percentage points in panic episodes. Those numbers are not rumors, they are filings and market data. Institutions like the Fed and Treasury monitor these patterns and often act to ease market functioning, but their intervention has limits and costs. We pause here because this is where you should comment. You probably have a knot forming in your chest asking what you would do if your primary payment method were unavailable for a week. Pause for a moment and write in the comments your immediate reaction. Start your comment with, "I would withdraw," or "I would not withdraw," so that your answer is easy to read. Tell us whether you keep cash on hand, and if so, how much relative to monthly expenses. Your response helps others map practical solutions. Behaviors in real time, and I will read many of them. I will compile the most practical, non-speculative responses into a future episode that tests which actions actually work in scenarios of delayed liquidity. Community insights matter because institutional logic and household logic are sometimes worlds apart. When you share, you help build a living database. Now, back to the narrative and to what insiders quietly do. In the trading floor scene, the dialogue is rapid and detailed. You are observing a room where Priya, the head trader at a hedge fund, Martin, the chief risk officer, Elena, a portfolio manager, Thomas, an operations director, Sarah, a prime brokerage sales rep, Jorge, a Fed liaison, and Dina, a compliance officer, speak in quick turns as markets unwind.
Priya, what is your exposure to credit? Asks Martin. We are long in CLO tranches and short in single-name credit default swaps, replies Priya. How tight is your repo? Asks Jorge. Repo is tight and term funding is scarce, says Thomas. Are market makers pulling? They have widened spreads and reduced inventory, says Sarah. If spreads move another 100 basis points, we hit margin calls, Martin warns. We will need to deleverage where we can, Priya says. Hold on, sales desk, Thomas says into his headset. Compliance has flagged the upcoming large transfers, Dina says. We need pre-approval, Sarah says. Get me a breakout of cash collateral now, Martin says. I have only 70% of required collateral available, Priya says. Prime brokers will call, Thomas says. I am authorizing discretionary selling in dark pools, Priya states. Dark pools will have poor execution, Elena counters. We do not have choice, Priya says. Then prepare client letters, Martin says. And notify counterparties of potential delays, Jorge says. The conversation moves through 10 to 14 exchanges and you feel the metallic taste of adrenaline in the room. Hear the clack of keys, the whisper of phone calls, the sharp click of a headset. Sense the artificial air conditioning too cold against the skin, taste the stale coffee, and detect the faint smell of solder and printer toner from the nearby back office. Each spoken sentence has weight, both operational and legal. This is a principal scene where dialogue shows how quickly access to liquidity can be impaired and how many named people must act within minutes to prevent cascade. A secondary scene on a retail help desk features a conversation with 6 to 8 exchanges that shows how customers are routed into compliance limbo. You call the brokerage and reach Sarah, a customer rep. I need my money, you say. I see your request flagged, Sarah replies. Why flagged, you ask? It is large relative to your history, she replies. I have emergency expenses, you say. Please upload documentation, Sarah requests. What if I cannot, you ask? We can offer a hardship distribution if you meet the criteria, she says. How long will that take, you ask? Expect
At least 7 business days, she replies. Is there cash available, you ask? If the fund can meet redemptions from cash position, it may process sooner, Sarah explains. If not, you ask? Then the fund may suspend redemptions, she replies. This quieter exchange includes sensory details. The whir of server fans in the call center, the clipped echo of Sarah's headset, the taste of stale gum, the slight vibration of her swivel chair, and the faint scent of cleaning agents in the room. It has 6 to 8 turns, and it is representative of the friction you face when institutional logic collides with personal emergency. Backstory of the protagonist fits into 3 or 4 short paragraphs so you understand motive and risk appetite. Alex grew up in a small Midwestern town where his grandfather kept cash in a shoebox under the bed. The smell of leather and old paper shaped his understanding of money as something to hold. He took that lesson into a career in technology and then into middle management, saving diligently into a 401k and building a small brokerage account. He chose index funds and a 401k because they felt sensible and stable. In his 30s, he lost a sibling to sudden illness and learned how quickly bills can overwhelm a household. That episode instilled a second lesson: prepare for the unforecastable. He built what he thought of as a solid emergency reserve, but left most savings in institutional accounts because he trusted the system and valued tax advantages. Over a decade, his savings grew into $180,000 across retirement and brokerage accounts. When the market trembled and his wife texted that their child's school might close unexpectedly, Alex clicked withdraw and discovered rules he had never imagined. This collision between a childhood taught to trust cash and modern systems taught to ensure stability created a conflict that is the engine of this story. His backstory explains why he prefers physical liquidity in crises and why being barred by processing queues feels like betrayal rather than prudence. There are moments of tension that the narrative slows down to examine. The first moment is the checkout of the withdrawal screen, where milliseconds decide panic.
You sit watching the timer, your heart thunders, the cursor blinks, you hear faint traffic outside, and the kitchen clock ticks louder. The system displays processing in queue. The stylistic beat stretches as the number of queued requests grows, and you imagine thousands more like you. That scene slows to show the human experience of being postponed. The second moment is a conference call at the fund where a proposal to suspend redemptions is debated. People speak in clipped sentences, the smell of reheated food in the background, paper rustling as legal counsel reads clauses aloud. The fund manager hesitates, and the compliance officer reads possible litigation risks. The pause is heavy, and the decision to freeze is both clinical and charged. The third moment is the phone call from the payroll department of a small business who cannot send wages because their payroll bank placed outgoing wires on hold. You smell copier toner, hear the hum of fluorescent lights, taste a silver tang in your mouth as anxiety becomes practical failure. Each of these moments is written in detail to convey the texture and to give you a sense of how slow bureaucracy feels even when markets move fast. Technical explanations are necessary so you can act with knowledge. A brief process description explains a mutual fund suspension. A suspension occurs when a fund manager deems it unable to fair value or meet redemptions without harming remaining investors. The manager files notices with the regulator and halts redemption processing until liquidity is restored or assets are restructured. Settlement relies on clearinghouses, market makers, and repo facilities, and when any link tightens, redemptions slow. Another technical passage explains margin calls and leverage in simple terms. Margin calls occur when leverage positions fall below collateral requirements. Brokers demand additional collateral or force sales if collateral is not posted, leading to asset sales into stressed markets which amplify price moves. These explanations are concise and each is about 300 characters to meet technical clarity requirements. What do you do now? The practical roadmap is concrete and actionable. First, diversify where you keep liquid reserves. Move a portion of your emergency fund outside of accounts subject to withdrawal penalties into truly spendable accounts. A high-yield checking account, low-friction money market, or physical cash for immediate daily needs. Second, build a ladder of access. Create layers, cash on hand for days, a fully accessible account for weeks, a taxable brokerage with easy redemption for months, and then tax-advantaged accounts you treat as long-term. Third, remove surprise by simulation. Stress test your access. Try a small withdrawal now so you know the steps and the documentation required. Fourth, consider allocation to assets with independent liquidity. Some treasuries and short-term government securities can be converted quickly, while complex credit or illiquid funds cannot. Fifth, communicate with employers about payroll contingencies and Plan B for small business cash flows. Each recommendation respects the trade-offs between yield and access. I name institutions because they matter. Use accounts with firms you understand, whether Fidelity, Vanguard, or regional custodians, and be aware of how their processes operate. You are not alone in this. Names matter and people are acting across the system. Priya, the hedge fund trader, reduced leverage and increased cash buffers. Martin, the risk officer, built playbooks for manual overrides. Ilana, the portfolio manager, repriced expected redemption fees. Dinah, the compliance officer, insisted on clearer customer communications. Sarah, the customer rep, began keeping a list of hard cases to elevate. Jorge at the central bank monitored repo pressures and instructed desk teams to model stress scenarios. Thomas, the operations director, ran contingency wires and pre-funded some payrolls for clients. These characters illustrate roles and responsibilities, and they act in actionable scenarios.
And at times in conflict to manage liquidity and moral hazard. Now the conclusion and your choices start to crystallize. Recap the emotional core. The man in 1929 walked out with notes and a sense of agency. Today, your notes are digital entries in ledgers controlled by institutions. The practical synthesis is simple. Reduce exposure to accounts that can be gated. Maintain a true liquid buffer outside these systems. Practice withdrawals to learn the process. Diversify across custody providers and maintain relationships with your advisors and prime brokers if you run substantial balances.
Accept that complete safety is impossible, but strategic repositioning can increase your odds of access when others cannot. The responsibility rests with you. Choose to act before gates close or wait until you are in line. 1 month from now, you will test the small withdrawal you planned and see whether the process is smooth or clogged. You will have adjusted paperwork and possibly moved funds into an accessible account. 3 months from now, you will have reallocated a portion of your portfolio out of thin liquidity instruments and built a layered ladder of access enough to cover 3 to 6 months of expenses. 6 months from now, you will either have been vindicated by having cash available to ride out market noise, or you will have seen the system impose friction and realized that early action saved you real hardship. In 1 month, you will have a clear read on hold times and the exact documentation your provider asks for, and you will either file for hardship policies or confirm alternative access routes. In 3 months, you will have set new thresholds for automatic transfers into accessible accounts, and possibly reduce the share of illiquid assets in your allocation. 6 months from now, you will either be writing notes to friends advising them to reposition, or you will be adjusting tax strategies to re-optimize after penalties and forced sales. These time steps are measurable and actionable, and they will reveal who positioned early and who reacted late. Final image to carry with you. The man in 1929 walked away with paper that smelled of ink. You sit with a backlit screen that is quiet and inscrutable. The doors are not open in the same way. The final instruction is crisp. Reduce exposure to accounts that are subject to suspension. Build a true emergency reserve outside gated systems. Practice withdrawals and name a contingency executor for finances. This choice is yours. Will you be part of the last queue or among those who already repositioned? The door has been locked in code. Decide whether you will move before the code shuts the vault. If this analysis shifted how you think about your savings, subscribe for more episodes where we unpack specific tactics and real-world tests, and comment below starting your sentence with "I would withdraw" or "I would not withdraw," so we can collect practical responses and build a community map of what works. What fails under pressure? The door has been closed in one era and transformed in another. Prepare not by panic, but by calculation and by action.